Hello there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Life is in Your Hands, Ask Cynthia. I'm Cynthia Clark, your palm reading consultant, and you can find me over at palmistry.world if you're interested in palm reading and looking for long-lasting love. You can go to my other site, which is loveinyourhands.com. This podcast is all about helping people be the driver in their lives. And I am super excited to introduce my very special guest today. Her name is Olga Kirshenbaum, and she is a financial coach and owner of Rags to Riches Consulting. She works with individuals on building a financial literacy foundation and helps them align their money habits with their money goals. Makes sense. Earlier this month, Olga released an ebook called Shmoney Guide, Making Money Choices Doesn't Need to Be So Scary. Yay, that sounds so practical and awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Cynthia.
Yeah, so Olga, I like to always start out by just asking, how did you get into what you are doing now?
Sure. So I actually went to school for accounting 10 years ago. I worked as an accountant for companies all the time until I started Rags to Riches Consulting. And I always was fascinated by how we always hear in the news companies are doing great and people tend to struggle with basic things like managing their money. So I was always wanting to figure out what is it that companies are doing that people aren't. And I found out a lot of it really goes back to the foundation of financial literacy. And a lot of the time it's budgeting. And that's how I really started to develop Rags to Riches Consulting.
Yeah, that makes sense. So were you growing up? How were you taught about money? Like, how was your family with money?
Right. So I think my story is a little bit different than most people I speak with. I am an immigrant. So my parents came here when I was 9 from Russia. And I kind of was aware that my parents always had a budget because it was tight. We were new to the country. But they never actually sat me down and said, hey, this is a budget. This is how budget works. This is how you check yourself every month. But I knew my mom was aware of a budget. So that was really the starting point, that I knew that there are certain things we couldn't buy sometimes because my mom was trying to stick to it. And then eventually when I did go to college, because my parents were new here, they didn't know about the college system here, that people start saving for college when their kids are essentially born. They were not prepared to kind of help me as much as most parents do. And that was really the first time my mom had a money talk with me. She just said, realistically speaking, this is the kind of support you can count on. But if you wanted to go to a private school or a school that's more than a city school, you're going to have to figure things out. And that was really my first step to kind of figuring things out when you didn't really have the means. And also when I was in high school, she kind of asked me to get a job. She said, I want you to learn the value of money before you go out there and have responsibilities. So I kind of started to learn that, when you work and you make money, it kind of has a different meaning to you as opposed to when I got money for chores or an allowance. So I kind of started realizing my attitude towards money was different when it was my money and when I was working for it. And then when I was in school, that's when I really started to see, how do you apply these basic concepts that all businesses apply in accounting? How can we apply this to day-to-day concepts of people managing their personal finances?
Yeah, that makes good sense. Yeah, my parents were, I didn't grow up in a wealthy family, very middle class, and we had 4 kids in the family. And so pretty much when I was, like just getting out of elementary school, getting into junior high, my parents were like, well, we definitely expect you to go to college, but don't expect us to pay for it because we can't afford it.
Right.
And so they really like ingrained it in me very early on that I would either have to get a scholarship or I would have to find a like get a job and do all that. So I got my first job when I was 13.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, it was interesting, but I think it's actually not a bad thing because it taught me some pretty big responsibility pretty early on. And even though they didn't teach me anything about money, like how to make it or how to keep it or
Right.
anything like that, like they didn't know anything about that, but they at least instilled a work ethic in me. And it's like, well, guess what?
Yes.
You can work and you can earn money. And it's like, oh, wow, I can do that. And that was pretty good. So
I also think it's really empowering to kind of be able to get a job when you're still, I got my first job when I was 16. So I remember feeling, wow, I can actually do this and I can make my own money. And that sense, that relationship with money kind of changes a little bit when it made me less scared of money in general, I feel.
yeah, definitely. That's been a lifelong thing for me is always having employment. And now I just work for myself, which is even better. So
I
I
agree.
but that's probably another topic.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, as far as budgeting goes though, I feel like a lot of people don't like they don't do budgeting. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I think the statistics are that roughly 40% of Americans are actually budgeting. And when I speak to people, most of the time, instead of doing a budget, what they're really doing is just expense tracking. So the difference between the two is that with a budget, you set goals of what you'd like to spend, and then you're tracking it to see if you're meeting your goals. But most people, they're just tracking it and they have a lot of feelings about it a lot of the time. They think, I'm overspending. But if you don't have a goal that you're trying to meet, how do you know that you're overspending? And a lot of people, because they don't utilize a budget, that's where they get into problematic feelings with money. And then they get into habits that don't fully make sense with their money goals.
Hmm. So how does a person start to create a budget? Like what do they need to do?
So I think it's a two-step process. If you have never done a budget before, what I really recommend for people is to keep a diary for 2 weeks and jot down every single thing that you're paying for, your food, your anything that's a monthly subscription, write it down. And if you can do it for a month, that's really optimal. But most people can't really do it for 4 weeks. It's a really long time. But if you do it for 2 weeks, you kind of get a good idea of what you spend in a month if you multiply it by two, and then use that as your initial budget. If
Hmm.
you have been tracking your expenses or you have a rough estimate of what you spend every month, then use that as your budget. Make a list of all the bills that you receive, anything any debt that you have to repay, the minimum payments, any savings goals. The way I teach my clients to do their budget, you include all of your expenses, you include all of your debt repayment plans in there, and then you also build in your savings. And then you funnel all the money out whenever you get paid or the couple of days around it. And then what's left in your checking account is your spending cash. This really gives people the confidence that they're able to manage their money, and that uncertainty of I'm not doing what I'm supposed to goes away because you have this list. And with time, as you keep going, I would say within a matter of 3-4 months, you will catch all those, one-off expenses that come once in a while, or you'll get a good idea of what your true budget is. and you'll get there, but you have to keep working on it. And I would say the most important part every month, aside from the tracking, you have to check in at the end of the month to see how you did. So there's two issues that I often see. There's people who just don't use a budget to begin with, and then there are people who have a budget and they don't compare how they actually did at the end of the month. They'll just say, oh, just again next month, but they don't know if they actually overspent. Maybe they don't have a realistic budget. So if you check in once a month at the end, see how you performed against your expectations, it's a lot simpler to move forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you feel like everybody should have a budget?
I believe everyone should have a budget, especially if you have money goals. Even if I know I actually spoke to someone when I was starting my business, and this person asked me, what is a budget? And I guess I took that for granted. And I said, well, it's your expected income and your expected expenses for the month. And he said, well, I don't have any expenses. I said, well, what do you mean? There's rent, there's utility bills. And he happened to be from a different country. And where he works, his employer actually pays for all of his expenses. So he truly does not have anything that he needs to pay out. He just gets his money, and that's his money for food, I guess. But he also gets fed at work. So he really doesn't have that many expenses to really shell out every week. So I said, well, I'm curious, why are you talking to me? Because clearly you have some sort of money goals. And he did have money goals. He wanted to be able to send money to his parents who lived in a different town. And we talked about it, and seeing it in a budget kind of written out allowed him to set the expectations for himself and for his family, what he can actually send every week.
Mm,
So even people who don't have a true expense income foundation for their money, it still makes sense if you have money goals. Because if you have money goals, and it could be debt repayment, it could be savings for a down payment or a car, you need to track how you're doing with the progress. Otherwise, you're just kind of stabbing in the dark, I'd say.
yeah. Yeah, when I talk to people just about goal setting in general, it's like, I can't remember who said it, but it was a saying that basically said winners keep score.
Yes.
Yeah, so winners, like if you want to be a winner in money, you need to keep track of stuff.
Absolutely. For my personal budget, I know I have savings goals, and I check them off every time I transfer that money. It gets checked off, and that it keeps me accountable. And if, something comes up in life and I can't do it, maybe there's an emergency this month, it's okay because I understand it, but I'm aware of what's happening. So I can always pivot. Having that information is truly powerful. A lot of the people I speak with, they feel so, I feel like they're just so scared of money. They are scared to even touch it, that this really gives them kind of an understanding that they are able to do it.
Mm. So yeah, so I think a lot of people are scared of money.
I think everyone is, to be honest. I know a lot of people who are accountants or financial planners, and they can sit down with a client and talk about their goals, but to sit down for them, it's completely different. I
Mhm.
mean, also as an accountant, I wrote my book not because I made solely smart money choices all my life. I've made poor money choices as well. And I think that's really what people don't talk about, and what I'd love to kind of break down the stigma of money conversations, because I believe that us not talking about money and how we deal with it leaves everyone without the tools to look for the information that everyone really needs right now. I think there is a correlation that only 40% of Americans are actually budgeting their money, and only 40% of Americans have $1,000 to cover an emergency expense. I think the
Mm, that's
information
scary.
is, it
Mm,
is. I think 80% of government employees were kind of wiping out all of their savings during the government shutdown at the beginning of the year.
mm,
So, it really puts it into perspective. I think a lot of people, because it's not polite to talk about money, people don't. And then when they have a hardship, they begin to shame themselves. And then they don't know how to come out of it because they don't even know who to talk to.
exactly. And a lot of times I think people, they get stuck in their own way of making money, like through their job or whatever,
Yeah.
and they don't even realize that there's other ways to make money. And,
Yes.
like passive income and creating different income streams and things like that. And it's like, they don't, I think a lot of people are scared of the stock market too.
Yes. Well,
You
I
know,
think a lot of people are also just so overwhelmed. I think one of the funny things for me when I started my business, I thought that saying I'm a financial coach would be very, people would understand what I do. But as I networked and met more people in the industry, I realized there's just such a big variety of what people do. I know people who just work in insurance, but they're still finance people. I know people who just train people how to set up QuickBook files for their businesses. So I think the topic is so vast that people are really intimidated by it, and not having the basics, which is why I kind of go back to the very basic foundation. That's really what's important. I know people that will go to financial advisors and they kind of nod their heads and they say, yes, I understand what's going on. And instead they'll come to me and say, oh, what was all that? What does all that mean? And the reality is, I think if we help people build the very basic foundation to help people understand what is a budget, how do you implement mindful spending tactics throughout your day without feeling like you're taking anything away from yourself, I think that's really the power there.
yeah. And there's lots of little things that you can do to make it easier and better and fun. You sort of make it like a game.
Exactly. That's actually what I tell a lot of my clients to do. Is gamification is a great way to success. You make a game out of it, make it a little bit challenging, and you will begin to have fun with it. I remember the first time I paid off a credit card, part of my debt repayment plan. I felt so proud of myself. And those are the little things that really help people believe that they are capable of doing it.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's important too to, you know, not feel like you're stupid or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think you're right about the whole shame thing of like, oh, I should know better, or I should know what this is, and I don't. So, you know, we just kind of bury our head in the sand. And
Absolutely.
it's
I
like,
know.
don't do that. Like, go get help.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where it goes back to the stigma of money talk. One of my first clients, her issue was that she watched her parents kind of live off of credit cards, and they kind of paid a credit card off with another credit card, and they were just always in this shuffle. And she was making a decent amount of money. She on paper it's like I should have enough money, but she was still in that cycle. And when she came to me, she said, I know it's bad, I know it's wrong, I don't know how to get out of it, and I don't know why I'm even doing it. So it really puts it into perspective. If we pick up these habits regardless whether our parents teach them or not, And then if we don't talk about it, once these people are in this situation, how do they get out of it? But they do feel the shame. They definitely feel that part. Oh, I should know what I should be doing with my money. I should know where it's going. I should be this, I should be that. But I think a lot of it is just self-doubt. And I think whenever we don't know about a topic, we think that we don't know anything, but we may know more than we do or we think.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it's just, I don't know. For me, it's really sad that a lot of people are feeling this way, because I think it's very simple once you get there. And that's really the tone of my book. A lot of people say that people that know me, that they hear me talking as they read the book, because there's lots of things that I don't know. There's lots of things that you know that I may not know, or so many other people out there. So there shouldn't be any shame that we don't know this, because at the end of the day, there's no financial literacy courses in schools. People are graduating from high school, they start taking all these loans out, and they don't have the foundation. And it's so simple to fall into that trap that if we're going to keep shaming people, they're not going to be receptive to it.
Totally. Yeah. And they should teach all this stuff in school. I really feel like it should be taught
Yeah,
at a really young age, because, especially young kids, they get it. They can pick up stuff so easily.
absolutely.
Puts them into good habits right away. And, I think kids love counting the coins and everything. I
Yes,
still remember, like, when I was a little kid, it's like, ooh, shiny penny. And
yes,
it's like, well, what does this do? Like, what does this get me? And
yeah.
yeah, it's just like, I don't know why we don't do that.
Well, I think we should use that as an opportunity. I talk to clients that have children. They ask me, how do I start these conversations with my children? And I think we have an opportunity. I think you have this memory of, oh, look, a penny. And I have a very similar memory. I think it has to do with us watching our parents growing up and emulating them and seeing that money is important. I think that that's such a great opportunity to teach them to keep having those great feelings, instead of eventually feeling like I should have learned all these things, but I didn't, and now becoming scared. So I don't promote your children sitting on every single budget and money conversation with your spouse. But at the same time, when you're making goals, let's say you want to go on a summer vacation, include your children on those conversations. Say, we're planning this thing, and we'll get them excited. If you're giving them money for chores or an allowance, you'll see that perhaps maybe they want to chip in, and it will give them this kind of initial experience with money. And the great part is they'll be doing it with you as their parents to guide them and kind of teach them, as opposed to when they're already older, they have all these mixed emotions about money, and now they're going to learn from a stranger who may not even be invested in them having true financial literacy education.
Exactly. And it can be so fun too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just make it fun.
I actually had a client recently who he had to get surgery and he needed to get some housework done. It's like, oh, I really need to get this done, but I'm hurt. And I said, well, you've been talking about wanting to teach your son some money lessons. I looked up the minimum wage in his state, and I was like, hey, it's only like $8. Why don't you tell your son, here, I'll pay you the minimum wage. You work for an hour. Maybe it was cleaning the garage or something. Maybe he'll have the attention span to do it for 2 hours. So at least he'll get some help. He'll get the money literacy part of it. And it's a win-win.
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah.
So everybody, once they set up their budget, if they don't, like if they don't succeed or whatever, like what would you tell people? Like if they, after a month, they see that they're like way over,
Right.
what do they do?
Well, I think after the first month, it's very unrealistic to set an expectation that you're going to have a perfect budget. There may be things that you didn't account for the first month. I like to tell my clients, if you've been kind of using a budget, it may take you about 3 months to find that sweet spot. But if you're one of the people that needs to kind of get that budgeting habit in place, it could be up to 6 months. So what's important is to understand that this is kind of a small goal each month that you're setting for yourself, and it's part of a bigger picture. And by making sure that you're reflecting on how you're going along with the budget every month, that will help you to keep going and figure out where those tweaks are needed. But also celebrate the wins. So for example, let's say you went over budget in food category, for example, but you were also able to save $150 that you weren't saving a month before. Celebrate that. You're still making progress. And I think if you're being mindful and honest, you have to be honest with yourself, because if you set unrealistic goals and expectations and you're not going to meet them, you're going to fall off from following a budget, because with unrealistic expectations, you're just never going to meet them.
Yeah, that's true.
So I would say that be patient with yourself, but also realistic with why did you go over budget? It's easy to say, oh, that was an emergency, but truthfully, was it? So to be accountable, you have to be honest with yourself, but also kind of be patient. So if you are improving in areas, make sure to remember that, because it takes, I would say, when I started using a budget, easily it took me a good year to find a space where I was truly comfortable with it. Because at first it took me some time to get into the habit of checking my budget every month, seeing how I was progressing. And then I would set different goals for myself, kind of playing around what worked for my savings goals, for my debt repayment. And based on that, I would just kind of switch it. And after a year, I began to feel comfortable. So lots of patience.
Right. And it takes time to change a habit,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, most people get paid on average twice a month. So think about it. You got paid, you shuffled your money out, another pay, and that's a full month. And it really flies by, especially, I mean, for an accountant, it's one of those things, the month it's a lot quicker than we think it is.
For sure. So should people look at not just the monthly expenses, but should they also project out into a year or 5 years or 10? Like how far out should they be looking?
So I think for a year, a great thing is to include all your taxes, for example, property taxes, real estate taxes, any bills that come in quarterly. So when you do a yearly budget, I update mine every quarter. So I have a budget for the year and then I'll update it every quarter. But it also depends on what your goals are. So if you have a goal in the next 3 years to save for a down payment or to pay down all your debt, I would track it out for the amount of years you're setting this goal for. The thing that's difficult, I would say, is to give people blanket advice, because I think that's the other issue, is that my savings goals and my debt repayment plan may not make any sense to the person sitting next to me. Our situations are so different. And I think that's the other reason why I always go back to the foundation, because if you understand the foundation, you'll be able to apply what makes sense to your situation.
That makes sense. Yeah, we're all so individual, and yeah, we got to take a look at our personal goals and situations. So
Exactly. And the other thing is, I would say, instead of looking at things, let's say $100 as a relation to your pay, I also look at percentages, because sometimes, $50 may not sound like a lot, but when it's $50 out of 250, that's a significant percentage. So everything is relative.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay, so let's switch gears, and we're going to take a listener's question. Okay, so by the way, if any of you out there have questions and you want to submit to the show, just go to email info@palmistry.world and submit your question with your name and where you're from and your question. And if you want to include your hand, you can take a picture of your hand and I will take a look at it. So today we have Vanessa from Portland, Oregon. And she says, I've been struggling for years financially. I feel like I should be farther along than I am. Can you see any blocks in my hand, and what can I do to clear it? So she did submit her hand.
Mm.
So thank you, Vanessa. And I did take a quick look at your hand, and I did find a challenge. By the way, pretty much all blockages can be worked with and transformed. Okay, so I definitely want to give the hope for everybody out there that you don't, just because you have a challenge right now doesn't mean you're going to have a challenge forever. Okay, so because your lines change on your hands. Okay, so
Interesting.
yeah, so what I found was that you had a block in your Pluto heart chamber, which is actually located on the little side, like little finger side of your hand, and it's sort of in the middle of the what we call the percussion. And you had a blockage in that area, and that will show up as actually a horizontal line. So it's right in between your heart line and your head line. Okay. So what that means when I see that is that you have a stuck pattern, typically from your past, that is wanting to transform, because this is the area of your hand that represents like chaos and destruction. So it's something that wants to break down and it wants to be released and transformed. Okay, so in terms of like if you're struggling financially, I would say go back and look at the pattern of when did you feel that from a past event. You know, did you go through like a bankruptcy, or did you go through a divorce where you lost a bunch of money? You know, there was something traumatic that happened to you. And that would be the place where you need to go back and kind of heal that area. And I would recommend actually starting out with, I use mudras. I don't know if you're familiar with mudras, but they're hand positions. And they can help actually align your subconscious with your goals. So
Wow.
so I would recommend going into what I call the chariot mudra. And that's where you take your index fingers and you put them together, and then you put your thumbs over top of your hand and you have your fingers kind of all splayed out. And this is called the chariot mudra.
Hmm.
So for you, Vanessa, I would recommend going into this mudra, going back to the time when you felt this trauma with whatever event happened. And it could be even younger, by the way. It might not necessarily be the first thing that you think of. Try to go back as far as you need to, and then go into your chariot mudra. And then I want you to just close your eyes and take a deep breath and just say that you are opening and balancing your Pluto heart chamber. And you will start to feel a shift in your body, I promise. It's just like it's going to free you up really well. So, um, so what advice would you give Olga for Vanessa?
I would say a lot of people actually feel that they are not as far along as they should be. But what is that should be exactly? I think part of going back and figuring out where Vanessa began to feel this way, I would also kind of wonder, what are you comparing yourself to? Because, you can see five people who are on the same retirement track in the next 10 years, but they have different needs, they have different responsibilities. So to say that you're not as far along as someone else would be, I would say do a stock of what you have and where you want to go, because that may give you a better perspective of just saying, I'm not where I should be. I talked to someone recently who said, my credit score is really terrible. I haven't talked to my creditors in years. And he just didn't want to move forward with kind of his journey to financial independence. And luckily, it's a friend of mine. I cornered him and said, okay, we're going to look at it right now. And he actually realized that his money situation and his credit score was not nearly as bad as he thought it was. So he built up all this fear and anxiety around his credit score. But then when he actually was able to quantify it and see it, he was relieved.
Mm, yeah, that's so good. Right, because we have these perspectives, and
Yeah.
yeah, these perspectives are not always accurate, or even, you know, like sometimes we're just completely out of reality.
Well, I think part of it is where we have to make so many decisions all day, every day, that we kind of fall back on these biases and we make assumptions sometimes, not realizing that we're making assumptions. So, a common answer I get to prospects that I approach, they'll say, "Oh, I can't afford your sessions." Like, we haven't even talked about money. How do you even know that?
Right,
So it's all about questioning where you're kind of basing that decision on.
right. Yeah. Well, we're with you, Vanessa. We're rooting for you. So, thank you so much for submitting a question. So, so Olga, how do people work with you?
Sure. So the best way to contact me is on LinkedIn, and also my email, which is Olga at ragstorichesconsulting.com.
Okay, perfect. And everybody get out there and start your budgets.
Yes. And anyone can do it. It's never too late and never too early to start.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been so interesting and very enlightening. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Please let us know if there's any other topic you want us to discuss. And remember to rate and review the show and follow us. We definitely appreciate that as we grow the show. So, this is Cynthia Clark. Remember to be the driver in your life and have a fantastic day.